Welcome back to Ambivalent Offenders. This is Erin.
This is Jamie. I know I sound different. I don't know what I have, but maybe a cold, maybe sinus stuff. Just bear with the voice today.
She's a little sick, so I'm coming in to introduce things, and then she will pick up with our Bonnie and Clyde story.
It'll sound sexier, all of like femme fatale, like sexy, raspy, but sounds like I've been
smoking some cigs.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jamie is going for femme fatale, so we love it. We're okay with that. We are going to pick up today with our part 2 on Bonnie Parker. Things are going to get a little crazy, I think. Before we get started, though, we wanted to shout out our newest Patreon member, Cody.
Yay, Cody.
We appreciate you joining the jury. As a little plug to our Patreon members, Cody included. Right now, you're able to vote on the next offender that Jamie will do.
Yeah, I still haven't decided, so the poll's still up. I'm going to decide by the end of tomorrow so I can start my research. So you have until then. You can join Patreon and you can vote.
Yep, if you want power over who we're going to cover next, please join Patreon and you can vote on that next offender. I just also posted Anne Boleyn mini episode on Patreon, as well as that long-awaited mini-sode on Edward II.
Yeah, finally.
And how if he survived, what was the evidence? We've got some good stuff going on Patreon. So if you haven't popped over to our Patreon page, the link's in the show notes. You can take a look at what's out there and then decide whether or not you want to join the Patreon. Get in early, guys.
Yeah, extra content each month and then a full-length episode. Hint, the one that I'm going to do for this month is going to be Rasputin. So if you're somebody who's like, you want that Rasputin episode, I mean, you'll always get, if you join, whenever you join, you get access to the prior months. But for the end of August, it's going to be Rasputin.
Yeah, that's exciting. I think anybody would want to hear more about Rasputin, don't we all? It's going to be crazy. He has a crazy life. So why would people not want to? So that's a good point. So guys, get in on that Patreon. We've done our housekeeping at the top of the show. So Jamie, do you want to launch back into our Bonnie Parker episode?
Part 2. So definitely. So we ended kind of with this big decision for Bonnie about, okay, is she going to go straight and live a life without crime? Is that going to give her the life that she wants? Or is she going to take that other route with Clyde, knowing that they are not going to win? Like, she has no delusions that they are going to win in the end. We ended with that quote from the book, Go Down Together, that Clyde Barrow and Bonnie Parker were insignificant because of who they were, but they would force the world to acknowledge them because of what they did.
That was a really powerful quote. And I think that's exactly what, when you think of Bonnie and Clyde, as you've covered their bio, they're not particularly, I don't want to say they're not interesting, but there would be no reason that we would know them except for what they did.
Yeah, there's nothing extraordinary, right? Unless Bonnie would have made it out of the slums, but we know cycle of poverty and all of that. Most likely she would have stayed in the Dallas slums. We know Clyde, he was continuing down a path of crime, in many ways unfairly targeted by the police. His options were pretty limited. I think this next part is going to help clear up. I wanted at first to talk about the misconception, but I'm going to actually first start the story. There's a lot of storytelling in the second part that involves more than Bonnie, but what I like about it is I think it helps dispel some of the misconceptions we have about Bonnie and Clyde and who they were and what kind of crimes they committed and all of that.
I think everybody has an idea in their mind what it is and what they did, but a lot of that can come from pop culture, of course. I'd be curious to hear what the actual facts tell us.
Sure. So I'm going to start with Bonnie and Clyde. They also have a few other men who I'm not going to name by name at this point. There'll be a few later who I will, but they form this Lake Dallas gang and they start robbing small businesses and banks. I want to emphasize that. You're going to see this throughout the episode. A lot of times we think of Bonnie and Clyde as these big time criminals who are like the John Dillingers, like the gangsters who are like holding up these big banks. No. Like sometimes a majority of the time, they would rob a place and get like $100. So very, very small time businesses and banks. We'll talk about why it even becomes an FBI issue later. But the book Go Down Together, as I said, one of my main sources, and I would definitely recommend. The author actually had an interview. There's, I guess, a movie that I hadn't heard about called Hideaway that focuses on the men who caught Bonnie and Clyde. So Bonnie and Clyde are in it. And one of the articles I was reading that was deciphering it had the author, his last name is Guinn, Guinn, some of his perspective in there, taking down some myths and things. I definitely recommend it. It reads like a novel. That's why it was hard to know what to cut when it comes to information.
Yeah.
Anyway, the book pretty much notes that the first 3 weeks of being criminals were, quote, notable mostly for bad decisions and worse luck, end quote. It describes it almost like a slapstick comedy, not exactly the glamour of Warren Beatty and Faye Dunaway.
No.
So essentially what happened at this point, she is part of the gang, but she's not part of this robbery. You're going to see her as a side character for still a little bit of time here. So she's not part of this robbery going wrong. What happened was Clyde had heard that there was a lot of money at an oil refinery nearby. So they did a robbery there. As an aside, all they did was they tied up the guards. They didn't kill them. I just wanted to make that clear. They chiseled out the safe and the safe was completely empty.
Oh, God. So all that work for nothing.
Exactly. And they did let the guards go. As you're starting to think, I know Bonnie was not involved in this, but as you're trying to weigh them in your mind, I think a lot of times when we think of robberies like this, we're thinking, okay, they're going to shoot all people who witnessed them. And they didn't. They just tied them up. So next, they decide to try their hand at robbing a bank.
So maybe we should try that.
Yeah. And they do these circles that end up being a pattern around the United States. This first one takes place in Minnesota.
Oh, nice. Oh, wow. So they got all the way up to Minnesota.
Yeah. They're going to drive almost all over the United States. Well, I'd say focusing in the Midwest, the South, the Southwest, up through around Texas, which is where they're from.
Yeah.
And circling back up through Louisiana and such. So they try their hand at robbing a bank in Minnesota. It's a small town. It was situated in a really perfect spot for the getaway car driver and everybody to have the setup. It wasn't in a busy place. It just worked really well for what they had in mind. But one of the members calls it off because, shockingly, in Minnesota, ice and snow. So they were worried about the getaway car.
Oh, so did they think that they were going to get stuck in the snow or something?
Right.
Oh, wow.
So they go back. They head back to their backup target. They had a backup target in Kansas. This time it was a success. I'm not going to go into the details, but the way back came with a whole lot of hiccups. I just want to again say, notably, no murders. They didn't intend any physical harm. But Bonnie at this point is just there to offer her support of Clyde. She isn't involved in the crimes themselves. Key point. So she is an emotional partner to Clyde. So she is a side character.
So what is she doing during the robberies? Is she out in the car or is she somewhere completely different or doing that?
Yeah, she's still in Dallas, actually.
Oh, okay. So she's not even
she's not even physically with them. That's going to change later. But at this point, her key piece is just providing that emotional support for Clyde.
Mm-hmm.
But she would still consider for herself part of the gang.
Yeah.
She does start to get involved when the gang returns to Dallas. Clyde had in his mind this ultimate plan of a raid on Easton Farm Prison, which if you listen to part 1, which hopefully you did, you know he had a really horrific experience there, one of the worst prisons in Texas.
Mm-hmm.
He wanted to raid it because everybody said how it was basically unable to be penetrated, that no criminal could possibly have a raid on it and get some of the people he was in with out.
So it wasn't even about money. It was about getting these people out that could potentially help him, or at least like do a favor for them.
But I think even more it was pride. Like it almost became an obsession of, I was treated so badly here.
Yeah.
And all these officers, all the head people say how there's no way in hell anybody could ever have a raid on this prison.
Mm-hmm.
And he wants to be the one to get people
to do
out.
it. I mean, I don't blame him. You talked about how bad the conditions were and that they were eating basically the food that the livestock had, some retribution.
Right. And remember, we don't know if it was an accomplice or Clyde himself, but cut off one toe and one part of his other toe before he knew he was getting pardoned, because that's how bad the physical labor was. He was hoping he could get out of some of that.
Yeah, the fact that you would prefer to be permanently maimed to get out of that, that's when you know it's really bad.
Right. So Bonnie does play a little role here. Her first role, and we're going to see this a few times, was going to the prison to act as one of Clyde's associates who he wants to meet up with. Again, I'm not going to name him at this point because he's not important, but she's acting as his cousin, and she's informing him about Clyde's plan to raid.
Okay.
It had gone actually so well, her going in, nobody suspecting anything, that she was anybody but this cousin. She had that high that she wanted to ride along with the gang when they went to steal some cars for the raid. That was supposed to be easy. Clyde, basically could steal cars in his sleep. Mm-hmm. That was one of his key skills.
Yeah, that was one of the reasons that she liked him, was his nice car, which was stolen. The thing that he can do is hotwire cars.
Yeah, and I almost want to go back and count how many different cars they steal throughout. Because, of course, as you're on the run, you're switching cars in small towns. You grab somebody else's car. They're constantly. Mm-hmm. So this is supposed to be easy. Clyde's used to doing it. As I said, he's pretty much an expert at this point. But the other people they were with wanted to get ammunition at a hardware store, not knowing that there was a night watchman there at the hardware store.
Oh, no.
So when they tried to rob it, there was gunfire exchanged with Clyde. Bonnie was still in the car. She was in the car. The men were outside the car. Clyde was shooting, and so were his associates. And after a car chase, which then led to a chase on foot, and they're basically running through a creek area, Bonnie was caught, although Clyde got away. And he told her before, he knew she was pretty much kind of stuck. And he's like, I got to get out of here. I don't want to go back to prison. Again, I had already made that very clear. Not quite a Sia, although she is going to contemplate that later.
Yeah.
We'll see. He promises he's going to come back. But he's like, I got to get out of here. I have a record.
Yeah. Girls, no, don't listen to him at this point.
Yeah.
I don't know. They always do say, you'll be better off. Yeah, I'll be back for you. You're a girl. You'll be fine. They won't treat you very harshly. But I got to go.
Which is kind of true, which leads to some mixed feelings here. Bonnie obviously was caught. Clyde got away. And this is going to be Bonnie's first taste of jail. Clyde, despite that dumbbell comment made in the newspaper from the first episode, he's not enough of a dumbbell to realize that trying to break her out right now would be way too much of a risk. He's like, she's okay. This jail is nothing like Eastham prison.
Mm-hmm.
Like, she will be okay.
Yeah.
And
it's not ideal, but she can last in here. She's good. She's at least getting treated somewhat humanely.
Yeah. And actually, Clyde's family is visiting her. It's really not that bad. So Clyde's family is telling him this as well. So he knows that it's not like a dire situation. And he needs money. Again, before he can take her out and then get back on the run, he needs money. So he needs to rob.
Mm-hmm.
So to Clyde, Bonnie could basically wait in jail until her grand jury hearing. He's letting her sit there. While waiting for her trial, of course, her mind was only on one thing.
Clyde.
Shocker, yeah.
Yeah. It always is. I don't know. At this point, I'd be like, fuck you, Clyde. I'm in jail. I understand the rationale. I just don't think that, at least from what I know of her and how her mom had this idea of them being upstanding citizens, this is embarrassing for her. This is like worst case scenario.
Yeah. When she had first smuggled that gun in for Clyde, there was so much fear for her that she would be caught. Surprisingly so, but this is coming from Clyde's little sister, Marie. We get a lot of her voice from her memoir. She wrote in her memoir that Bonnie didn't seem angry at Clyde at all, or the Barrow family, again, who visited her often. They were a source of support. However, in Go Down Together, the book, the historian notes that it wouldn't be like Bonnie not to be scared or panicked at the idea that she had been deserted. Like, that was part of her personality. Even though she might not be saying that, she, like we saw before.
That's what I was about to say. We saw when she was worried when he broke out of prison with his accomplices, and she thought that he had used her and had abandoned her.
Yeah, and didn't call for 4 or 5 days, right? Those thoughts are still kind of running in her brain. When her mom does visit Emma Parker, Bonnie supposedly said she was done with Clyde forever, and she only noted all the bad qualities about him. It's hard to know, again, if she's playing up for her mom, which we'll see later, or either way, she most likely was full of these different emotions and thoughts. So she might not be lying to her mom when she's angry at Clyde, and she also might not be lying to the Barrow family when she's not mad.
Yeah. Like, you can have all those things at once. You can feel those mixed emotions, and it might depend on the day, too. Some days might be easier than others. I think we all recognize that, but I can't imagine her mom, just from what you've told us about how her mom, like we said, perceived the family. I can't imagine that Emma was very happy with this.
Does not like Clyde, does not like his family.
Oh, she doesn't. So she's not a fan.
We'll never get her full perspective on the family. Later, when the two come back to Dallas, which they do often, she will meet with the larger Barrow family. She'll like kind of be part of their whole things.
She's not completely outside of it, but that doesn't necessarily mean that she approves of it.
It's more like, here's a gathering spot where we're going to all meet.
Yeah.
If anything, it can be more for Bonnie's safety, because it's going to be in a time and place where they assume that it's going to be the most safe.
That is good to know. But yeah, at least based on what you've said about Emma, I can imagine her not being a huge fan of the situation that Bonnie's found herself in.
For sure. So during her time in jail, she wrote a whole collection of poems. Remember earlier I said in school she was really into poetry?
Yeah.
And she called it Poetry from Life's Other Side. There's a lot of different poems in there. In one poem, a country girl falls in love with a con man, the girl being lured into crime by the lover Jack, the con man. Some people obviously speculate that modeled on her life. It did say in there, one of the lines was, it said, quote, Jack was just like a god to me, end quote. Which, as we've seen Bonnie's feelings towards Clyde, that pretty much fits along with that. And later, her mom is going to get her poems. Her mom didn't read all of her poems.
Moms never do. I mean, as a writer in the family, moms skim. They skim over the writings. They don't read.
Yeah, especially because some mentioned actually prostitutes and drug use. I'm not going to go too much into it, but the author speculates that obviously we don't know, but that she was either involved in or close to those things to have that.
Yeah.
How she wrote about it seemed like she was familiar with it. So we can't say it was necessarily her, but was at least witness to it. And of course, those were the ones that horrified Emma Parker, and she did not read.
Yeah. She like skimming through it, and I was like, no. I'm not gonna read this.
I know one has prostitution in the title.
She was like, I'm gonna skip through that one, as any mother would do. I remember you mentioning in the first part that there was speculation that Bonnie might have resorted to prostitution, and at least because of the, in terms of the evidence, was because of her nice clothes.
Right. The money that she was making at that time. So Emma Parker at this point is fully hating Clyde and thinking that Clyde has corrupted Bonnie. That is her thinking. There's some good news, though, for Bonnie. She was actually released on June 27th, 1932, when a grand jury, they finally met and they decided they weren't going to proceed with the charges due to a lack of evidence.
Okay.
Again, Bonnie gets picked up by her mom. She insists to her mom she's, quote, through with Clyde.
That's like such a, I know Bonnie's not a teenager at this point, but that is such a teenager thing, being like, I'm done with him. Yeah, she's early 20s.
Very young. Yeah, I think, or maybe about 20.
Yeah, I'm done with him. I'm never going to let him back into my heart. And then.
Yeah, she would be 21 or 22. I can't remember the month of her birthday.
Yeah.
She was born in 1910. Yeah. So what had been going on with Clyde during this time? Because a few months had passed. Things were much worse for Clyde. 2 months prior, so go back from June. So May, April. In April, while Bonnie was still in jail, during a robbery attempt on a store on April 27th, 1932, John Boucher, the store owner, was shot and killed. Notably, not by Clyde, but this is according to Clyde.
Yeah. Do we believe that? Do people believe that? I don't care about historians. I care about you. I care about your opinion.
I'll answer that question later because there's going to be another murder attributed to him. And I think that's where we can talk more about, is he trustworthy when he says, I swear I did not, like to his mom, I did not kill him. I was there, but I did not kill him. He definitely admitted he was there to his family, but he said, I did not kill him. But he's a participant, right, in a murder. So he's going to be tied to the murder nonetheless. Nobody knows who shot John Boucher, who dies, especially since Mrs. Boucher actually is able to identify Clyde out of photos given by the police.
Oh, wow.
Now Clyde's a murder suspect, one with wanted posters that said, quote, take no chances on them as they are desperate men, end quote. Ooh. So basically, shoot him if you need to.
Yeah, I was about to say, does that mean that gives people the permission to shoot them if they see him? Well,
exactly.
Yeah, that's a lot. Whether or not you believe Clyde, he's at least now officially a very wanted man.
Yes, much more than small town robberies and all of that. This was another moment, a huge moment in Bonnie's life that happened in April. She, of course, hears about it, knows about it. She's released in June. Now she had to decide, do I leave Clyde? Of course, they're not married. Remember, she's still married to Roy, at least in name.
Oh,
Roy. Clyde's on the run for murder. Or does she start a new life like her mother had insisted? So she has these two things.
Mm-hmm.
But she also knew two things. One, Clyde had sworn he would never go back to prison, which implies what?
Well, I'm assuming that he would kill himself or allow himself to be killed before he gets imprisoned.
Yes,
yeah,
exactly. Right. He's like, I'm never going back to prison. And two, that if they were together, they'd be on the run for the rest of their most likely short lives.
Mm-hmm.
As I said, both Bonnie and Clyde were not, while they do get haughty at times or see themselves as sometimes the magazines portray them, they are still very aware that this is going to end with us dead.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there is no other option. Well, at least for Clyde. Bonnie might be along. She hasn't necessarily said at this point, I'm not going to prison.
Yeah.
But Clyde's like, never again. I'm going to die before, whether it's being shot by the police or suicide by the police.
Yeah.
That's what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Well, I don't want to build it up because we all know what she chose.
Yeah. She's not going back. She's at the point of no return at this point, at least. It seems like that's how she feels about it.
Yeah. She chose, obviously, Clyde and a life on the run. She sent to Clyde, most likely through the Barrow family. They were really the ones who would help communicate through things, that she was ready to rejoin them. He was now living in Wichita Falls, and that's going to be a base that they're going to use often when they commit their crimes. They're going to come back to Wichita Falls.
Okay.
And again, she's going to lie to her mom because she doesn't want her mom to worry like moms worry. And she said that she had found a job in a Wichita Falls cafe. But according to the book, Go Down Together, this is what Emma was supposedly thinking. This is what she noted in her memoir. Quote, something whispered to me that she'd gone to Clyde. Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
But she also wanted to believe Bonnie. Like, that was what she wanted to happen. It's like almost this willing ignorance.
Yeah, I think that's such a mom thing where you want to believe the best of your children and you hope to believe what they're telling you. But obviously, in her heart of hearts, she knew what this meant because obviously she knew the dynamic more than even we do about Bonnie and Clyde.
Yeah, and I kind of want to tie back to the Elvis episode. I think in a similar nature to Priscilla and Elvis, I think if her mom had, of course, Bonnie's much older, right? Not a child. But if her mom had really been like, no, you're not going, like basically locking her away or sending her away to relatives or something like that, Bonnie would have done something.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I don't want to say she's not an innocent, but she's made her bed and she's going to figure out a way to do it regardless.
Yeah. We'll talk more about this decision and how it fits into what we know about Bonnie. But it really does make sense later, especially here after this next really major turning point for the gang itself. Bonnie's going to spend the night with her mom in Dallas. She hasn't officially joined up with them, although she's made that decision. The men in the gang are going to go out and blow off some steam in Oklahoma. So they came across while they were driving. It wasn't anything planned. They saw this big pavilion with music. The closest thing I can think, just because the Minnesota State Fair is coming up.
Like a fair. Yeah.
So there was a big dance. There was music. There was all this different things. So fun, right?
Yeah. They're like, let's forget our robbing and go and blow off some steam. We'll get some drinks. We'll probably hit on some girls. Well, it'll be a time. It'll be a time.
Yeah, exactly. I will name one of the members because he's going to come up a few times. Raymond Hamilton. Most of the time, I'm just going to call him Raymond.
Okay.
But keep in mind, they're also wanted criminals. So making a stop at a large event with a lot of people. Also, maybe you should just continue to drive on.
Yeah, maybe we don't get our time to blow off steam, maybe we just keep driving.
Maybe you have to do that in a more secluded place.
Go hit up some random dive bar or something.
Right. So 2 of the men supposedly tried to dance with local girls, and there was some issue with that.
Mm-hmm.
According to Clyde, he said he was in the car the whole time and he wasn't even drinking. With Clyde and drinking, this could be true. He actually, a lot of times during the crimes, but usually it was during planned times of crimes, he didn't drink because he wanted to be on alert.
Yeah.
Bonnie was more known for drinking. Whether or not he was in the car, I don't know if I fully believe him on that. Right. A sheriff just approaches the car, not like, just notices the car. I can't remember what the exact piece was, but the sheriff isn't looking at the car and being like, this is a stolen car.
Yeah, he doesn't know all the details. Even at that time, it would be hard to get that information, even if they're wanted, to get all that information out to people across
and especially across state lines.
Yeah.
Nearly impossible. He's just approaching the car, but things escalated wildly because obviously the men know they're wanted and they're young, stupid men. I shouldn't even call them men. They're boys, right? Like 21, 22-year-old boys. So they see a sheriff coming towards the car and
they start freaking.
Fuck, we've been caught. Things escalate wildly and it ends up with one officer dead and another badly wounded. One of Clyde's men, Dyer, he was actually caught and taken for questioning. And he points his finger at Clyde. He blames Clyde for the whole thing. And as I said, another man named Raymond Hamilton was part of this as well. Oh, he blames both of them, Raymond Hamilton and Clyde.
Okay, so he's pointing the fingers at them, but he's the only one who was caught during this.
Yes, so okay. Clyde and Raymond got away.
They're gone.
Now things had gone from bad to horrible because now Clyde's wanted for 2 murders. And while he may have received a life sentence for the death of Boucher, the store owner from earlier, now basically the death penalty was pretty much ensured.
Yeah, there's no point in him coming forward. There's no point in him turning himself in unless he has a death wish.
Exactly. To quote from, again, Go Down Together, if he was ever captured, Clyde believed he'd receive an automatic conviction and a day with the electric chair. Just as you said, it's like, at this point, there's no going back.
Yeah.
Turning yourself in and saying, I did not actually shoot them and kill them. Of course, your men are going to turn on you. They're going to say, yes, you did, because they want to not. So it's a whole nother ball game.
At this point, it's just basically forced him into continuing his life of crime.
Right. And I would say at an elevated level, because before it was robberies, car thefts.
Yeah.
And not that he's now going to go out and start murdering, but now in these different areas, even though they're all still very state by state, people in these certain states are looking for him, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in Kansas, they're looking for him. And now in Oklahoma, they're looking for him. In Texas, that Dallas area, they've always been looking for him. It just puts an even higher alert because now he's not just like a small-time criminal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's hit the big time.
Yeah.
That was my 1930s voice.
Yeah, I liked it. Or your transatlantic accent.
He's hit the big time, right?
Yeah. Exactly like that. I can't even try because my voice is...
I try to do it, but Matt's really good at it.
Well, maybe we will have to pull him in at some point. You can
during
do a commercial break.
You could do the fake Bonnie and Clyde radio broadcast or something.
Yeah. Okay. Now he has to do that. The question might be like, how is Clyde feeling with this escalation? Because the other crimes were not violent, right? They tied up the guards in the one scenario.
Mm-hmm.
And everything that we've known so far about Clyde is that he hasn't been the one to push violence, like as a first tactic. Clyde's mom, she notes that Clyde didn't seem particularly upset about the incident. So what is thought is that maybe at this point he had at least grown comfortable with the violence and killing. Not necessarily that he was happy about it, but he wasn't as horrified.
I would say like he's been desensitized to it.
That's a good way to put it, yeah. Before going back on the run, Clyde did what he promised. Bonnie had sworn she would stay with Clyde no matter what, so he sent somebody from the gang to go pick up Bonnie from her mom's house. It's now August 6, 1932, and this is really when Bonnie goes from side character, so somebody on the periphery, Clyde's girlfriend, to Clyde's full-fledged partner in crime. So we'll see that shift. It's actually Bonnie's idea for their next move. Her idea is to head out to New Mexico. She might be like, what the heck is in New Mexico?
Well, nothing. Is that the point?
She's going to visit her maternal Aunt Millie under the pretense that she's a newlywed, and she's newlywed to James White, a.k.a. Clyde.
Okay. I was like, we already had Roy. Who the fuck is James White?
And they brought their friend Jack Smith with them, Raymond Hamilton.
Okay.
Aunt Millie had not really been in touch with her sister for years. There wasn't anything to make her immediately doubt this scenario. Right?
Yeah. It's not like she had been receiving information from her sister that told her that Bonnie's been involved in all this. I'm sure she's just like, yeah, come on in.
Basically, they're almost this premise that they were taking a honeymoon trip.
Honeymoon with their BFF.
Jake Smith. Yeah. There's gonna be another third wheel later. There's always it seems to be a third wheel.
I think that's the part where I'd be like, okay, this is suspicious. Who takes a honeymoon with a third person, unless it's a throuple. But
sure,
I know throuples were not quite as
common.
Well, I mean, I'm sure that happened at the time, but they weren't as advertised as they are now. So I can't blame Aunt Millie.
No. And another reason is New Mexico also seemed like a good spot because there would be no reason for police there to be looking out for them. As I said, at this time in the 30s, states are very localized unless it's a federal crime. New Mexico police are not like, okay, we're on the watch for Clyde Barrow. He's not known. Aunt Millie initially welcomes them in. She quickly, though, becomes suspicious because of two things. One, their very nice car, and all the money that the men seem to have. When I was reading that, I was like, are they flashing their cash? Because stupid boys, like, try to be more subtle.
Well, 20-something-year-old boys. I think you could just blame it on that. God damn it.
Yeah.
Clyde, Raymond, can you just go under the radar for a little bit? Must we? Must we flash the cash?
And must we always have a flashy, nice car? Because actually, what kind of set off bells in her head is coincidentally, there have been a lot of car thefts in the area.
Oh.
And so Aunt Millie, who's kind of an uptight, moral woman, that's how they should describe her, she calls the deputy, Joe Johns.
She's Aunt Karen.
She's calling the police. In her mind, robbery is not cross, but he might be stealing some cars. Yeah. So maybe he can just stop by.
Uh-oh.
Deputy Johns sees the brand new car parked at Millie's. He thought he'd talk to them and ask where they got the car. Again, thinking that they would not necessarily admit to stealing it, but that he's found his criminals.
Yeah.
Bonnie answers the door and she says the men were getting dressed, but they would all come right back out. So the deputy goes to look at the car and the men came out the back and they held shotguns up to him. They didn't kill him, but they couldn't let him go. He actually came as a hostage as they drove back towards Texas. Of course, Aunt Millie's going to be telling on them. Come on, Aunt Millie.
Yeah, Millie. And Karen. She's a Karen, like a little bit of a Karen.
Can't you look over the fact that a deputy was just held hostage?
I mean, she's a little bit of a meddler.
It's kind of her fault for.
Am I blaming Aunt Millie? Kind of. If she minded her own damn business.
Why did she not think they had money to buy that car and just to have a lot of money? she's making a lot of assumptions.
Yeah.
Aunt Millie, even more of a narc, gave the police Bonnie's name and their descriptions. And so authorities figured out pretty quick that it was probably Clyde and Raymond.
Oh my God. So she really did give them up. She gave Bonnie's name? Yeah. I get giving up these dudes. You don't really know them, but your own niece. Stop ratting on your family and go to a picture. It's the 1930s. See a Cary Grant movie. It'll make you feel some things.
At this point, the police are not focused on Bonnie, right? They are focused on Clyde and Raymond. Now, this is a strange thing. At the same time as the police are looking for them, there's a headless corpse found in the area, and authorities thought that it was the deputy.
Yeah.
So it was probably from Clyde and Raymond killing the deputy.
Yeah.
Ends up it had nothing to do with it. It didn't explain what actually had happened, but that was the initial thought. So that made them even more obviously alarmed.
Oh yeah. Wait, so we do find out who's
No, we never find out who's the headless corpse.
Oh no.
Except we know it didn't have anything to do with Bonnie and Raymond. Johns was actually a very cooperative hostage. He wasn't fighting or trying to do anything sneaky. While looking for a car, again, to trade cars with outside of San Antonio, Clyde actually let him free, and he asked him to not alert anyone for an hour. Obviously, this is wishful thinking, but I mean, I think even Clyde knew that. Johns didn't quite follow that, but by the time because he was kind of let out in an area further away from houses, by the time he actually got to a house, called, it had been a bit of time. And he was super confused when he heard about the headless corpse.
Like, I got my head. It's still here.
Like, what are people talking about? We already know that Bonnie wanted fame and her name to be known. Well, now it was all over newspapers and the radios. The three had outran cops, stole another car, and they made their way to Dallas on the back roads. They hid back in that original farmhouse, and then they went to Fort Worth first to get automatic rifles to be prepared to outshoot the authorities.
Oh, wow.
So they're like, we need better weapons than the local cops have, which this would be.
Yeah.
Raymond decides he wants to leave at this point. He was what he considered, quote, a gentleman bank robber, end quote.
All right, Raymond. All right.
Yeah, I think you're giving yourself a little too much credit.
Gentlemen, right? I'm not so sure about that.
Yeah, he didn't think he belonged with these sloppy thieves, which I'm like, but you're a little sloppy if you were caught in these things too.
Yeah.
There was another reason though too. He also just didn't like Clyde.
That's fair.
That's enough time in a car with Clyde. Now he's out of the picture, and it's just Bonnie and Clyde for the moment. Marie notes in her memoir, Marie being Clyde's little sister, that during this time, this is when Bonnie and Clyde lived off small heists in small towns and small stores, service centers. They would steal cars to lose authorities. But this is also when a huge mistake is made by Clyde. I mean, I guess technically Bonnie too, but Clyde, you'll see why. During one of the car switches, and they're switching cars all the time, he leaves behind a medicine bottle that must have had his name on it, so it could be tied directly to himself.
Oh.
So now there was proof that they were committing crimes across state lines.
Uh-oh.
So now who can get involved?
I'd assume the feds, if it's across state lines.
Yep. The FBI, J. Edgar Hoover.
Nope. Not who you want to be on your tail.
But at this time, they're actually pretty safe because the FBI is much bigger criminals to deal with.
Yeah, there's bigger fish to fry.
Yeah, these are these small little heists. They're not going after them yet. But they could. Now they could.
They have a reason to in the future if they decide to. God damn it, Clyde. Always look as you're leaving your vehicle. Make sure you grab everything.
Triple check. It's like when you're leaving a hotel room.
You can't speak. Remember after your wedding, didn't you guys leave like 30
I think probably. But I wasn't running from the cops. I wasn't running from the cops.
I know. I just have to tease you because I can't imagine looking back in the hotel room and seeing a bunch of shit and being like, it's fine. It's fine.
I think I was so hungover. I was like,
fair.
It's okay. And yeah, I'm not having to be worried about crime happening.
Fair enough.
So I would say this is probably the peak happiness of Clyde and Bonnie's time together. They're described as having fun during this time because they're sending postcards to the Barrow family. Not to say that they didn't run into issues. They needed money for gas, food, places to stay, clothes. At this point, Bonnie isn't actively holding anybody up yet. So she's not using guns.
Mm-hmm.
So it was really limited where they could rob because it's just Clyde. Even though she's driving the car, it's just him holding anybody up. So if there's, 3 or 4 people in the store, he's kind of fucked. So that's really limits where they could rob. So they were not getting money much at all.
It's the small time.
Yeah. But as I said, as they're sending postcards home, it's almost, I don't want to say a vacation, but they're having good luck, right? They haven't been caught.
Yeah.
There hasn't been anything horrific.
Well, they're having a nice little vacation. Good for them. Get away.
Mm-hmm. Now I'm going to pull in a little history connection just to make this all fit with the roads and traveling. So after World War I, more Americans could afford cheaper cars. So more roads were built. With more Americans driving across the country, there had to be inexpensive places to stay. Because before there weren't, right? If you don't have a road, why are you going to build a giant place to stay in this small town? Nope.
Exactly.
Right. Now you need places to stay. Especially think about today in today's world, off of all those major highways, by airports, anything like that. Just hotels, right? So when Bonnie and Clyde are on the run, they stayed often at what are called motor courts. I hadn't heard of this. So they were kind of like little standalone cabins that had indoor plumbing. So that's a nice perk. Had beds. And it only cost $1 a day.
I'd take that.
I know. Another thing that was a plus about that, as opposed to camping, is it allowed them to also stay near major roads. And away from congested downtown areas in case things got bad. So if they were in the middle of a town, like let's say Dallas, something goes bad, you're hitting traffic, like all that.
Yeah.
These are, yes, on the side of major roads, but still kind of in the middle of nowhere. That doesn't mean they could always find one, though. When they couldn't, a lot of times they'd actually find a farmhouse and ask the farmers to stay. This may seem really weird, but during the Great Depression, people were much more willing to share their homes with others who were passing through, because a lot of people were passing through because they didn't have homes. They didn't ask for names. And a lot of times the farmers were not, it's not like they were dumb. A lot of times they figured that these people were criminals on the run. But at this time, they're also not happy with the government. So it's like,
sure. They're not going to turn them in.
I'm not going to turn you in. So they didn't ask for names. And Bonnie and Clyde always actually paid, which was the kindness.
Yeah. So you can see where, people who are struggling, even if you just get a little bit of money,
right,
that's an added bonus.
Right. And they didn't have to pay a lot of these times when people would stay. It just it's like the kindness. But they always paid, which helped any family that they stayed at. Especially, we know farmers in this time are particularly desperate. And it helped them that also people across the country, as I said, weren't happy with the government and the law. By this time, 1 out of every 8 farms had been foreclosed on. So,
jeez,
as you were saying, they're not anxious to pick up the phone and call the cops. Like,
Yeah. They're like, fine, you can stay here, especially if you're giving me money. That's going to help me. I'll help you. And you're probably staying just for a night, and then you'll go on and you'll go on your way.
Yeah, and Bonnie and Clyde actually had that. That was a rule. The people were nice, of course, but they didn't necessarily always trust that somebody wasn't going to, especially as they become more notorious. So they would only stay one night at each place. Bonnie loved this. She loved staying on the farms because this is when she could have her big social personality come out. So she doted on kids. She made friends really easily with all the people she met. Clyde was the more introverted. He was more unpredictable, moodier. It's not that he was mean.
He's not the social butterfly.
Yeah, he kind of is, the one fading in the background as opposed to Bonnie, who's all over the place. If they were in really desolate areas where they couldn't even find a farmhouse, they had to either camp in their car, which is not Bonnie's favorite, or just camp.
Yeah, if I was Bonnie, I'd be like, you promised me glamour, and now I'm camping.
That's exactly what I was going to say. It was definitely not glamorous life like she imagined. And she complained to Clyde about it and drink bootleg whiskey. This time there's prohibition going on, so it's not allowed. So she's like,
girl, I see you. That's what I would be doing if my man forced me to camp.
I'm like, wait a minute. I was promised this glamorous life on the run, and I'm sleeping in this bush in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
At least
it's not even glamping.
Yeah.
It's not even glamping.
At least give me that whiskey. Even though I hate whiskey, yeah, I would drink it. I would.
Oh, 100%.
They were known to get into fights that escalated a lot. They fought a lot, and often, trigger warning for domestic violence, they did escalate to hitting on both sides. So Bonnie hitting Clyde, Clyde hitting Bonnie.
Yeah, a little bit of a toxic relationship. I'm surprised. I know that she recognized with Roy that she couldn't live with him and that it wasn't sustainable. I'm surprised that, I guess at this point, she's all in with Clyde, so it's not even a question.
But I think even at their most, I don't want to say hated times, but times where they were just at each other's throats, we're going to see in an incident later on, they still have each other's backs. And that didn't change how Bonnie felt about Clyde. She would have been very pissed at him in the moment, but she still would die for Clyde. I don't think that ever wavered.
Oh, definitely. I just don't want us to breeze past domestic violence in this case, obviously.
In October, they actually start heading back towards Texas. You can tell that both of them have a really close connection to their family. You're going to see this all the time. They come back to Texas. Even though it is a risk. So they miss their families. And they also had hope that things had died down enough, especially around Clyde, that their homes wouldn't be staked out at this point.
Yeah, that people aren't waiting for them there.
Right. So they arrived in Dallas, but still to be safe, as they drove past the Barrow service station on Halloween, Clyde, he sends a secret message with a time and place for a family meeting and an empty Coke bottle that he throws out.
Oh, brilliant.
I know.
I love it.
I do love that. It's very cinematic.
Yeah. Spycraft.
Bonnie made a quick stop to see her mom just to let her know she was okay. She only stayed a few minutes. She couldn't risk anything more. At the Barrow family meeting, which they have these family meetings at this point, Emma Parker is not part of it. They heard that Clyde's brother was in jail for car theft, but in bigger news, Clyde was wanted for another murder, third murder.
Oh, okay. When you murder somebody else,
right,
my baby.
How did this happen? Well, sensational newspapers made money off of gangsters like Clyde. And people like Clyde were like a prime commodity. So stories were usually embellished. It's kind of like a game of telephone as it goes down. And the police weren't really any better. Police reports got a lot of things wrong too. One poster had Bonnie listed as Mrs. Roy Harding, which the Roy part Yeah, you could see because legally she was married to Roy, but his last name was...
Oh, okay. I forgot what his last name was, so they just gave her another last name. What would a Roy's last name be? Hardy.
Yep.
Okay,
sounds like a Roy, yeah. And of course, police officers are going to play up their stories to make it seem like they were way more in danger than the reality. So many would be like, "Oh, I was shot at by Bonnie and Clyde." Again, making up this grander thing because it makes them sound much cooler.
I'm not surprised at that.
Right. A sheriff, for example, at the end of August claimed that Clyde had shot at his deputies, which wasn't true. Bonnie and Clyde never shot back. At this point, Bonnie is mentioned in the articles, yes, but she's vaguely mentioned. They call her, quote, Dallas girl, end quote, or Clyde's companion. Any idea why?
Why they don't name her?
Because the police know her name.
Is it because she's married, that she's not married to him, or that she's already married, that it's too scandalous or something like that?
Not quite, but on the right sexist theme.
Oh, they don't give a fuck about a girl. How about that?
Well, it basically, the authorities knew her name, so that wasn't the problem. They knew Bonnie Parker, despite that one wrong wanted poster. But this was a time when a woman wasn't seen as someone who could be a criminal in her own right. Like choosing to break the law on her own terms, that autonomy. Instead, it was pretty much written like she was forced or possibly just so in love that she didn't know any better. Like she didn't have a brain enough to.
There we go. There, bingo.
Like, again, that idea, so in love, that basically your brain couldn't work enough to, or be smart enough to realize, oh, I'm going to get in trouble for murder.
Oh, no.
Right. Okay, so what was this murder that he's getting blamed for? So a brutal murder had occurred during a robbery on October 11th, one day before our birthday, but not in 1932.
No, we're not that old. Sometimes it feels like we're that old, but we're not. I'm currently sitting with a heating pad on my back because I have a backache. So it definitely feels like I was born back then.
And all of you hear my voice, so I sound like I was born back then. So October 11th, 1932, in Sherman, Texas, this murder had been attributed to Clyde. As I said, it was a brutal murder, which I'll talk a little bit about. The killer was around Clyde's height, and somebody had noticed that they had seen Clyde in the area, which probably wasn't true. But again, with all that hysteria, Clyde all over the place. So was Clyde the killer? Well, we know Clyde did rob small town places like this, a small town store. This would be ordinary. But the man was unarmed, and he wasn't putting Clyde in any immediate danger. And that really doesn't fit with Clyde's other crimes. The only time he really was shooting back was when he was shot at and he felt like he was in immediate danger. In this case, neither of those were true. And on October 11th, Bonnie and Clyde supposedly hadn't even reached Texas yet on their way back home.
Okay.
Last thing, this comes back to that question you asked me earlier, if I believed Clyde. Clyde did not deny this murder to his family. Again, that may seem ridiculous because you might be like, well, of course he did. But for every other murder, he admitted that it occurred, although he usually tried to place the blame somewhere else. It doesn't really make sense for him to lie about one murder out of all of them to his family.
Yeah. I mean, you see this in other true crime cases, although there are some that people think that criminals did, but they don't admit it, so it's hard. I can see both sides, but I guess with all the other evidence, it seems unlikely that this was them.
Yeah, between timing and one that it was a brutal and the man was unarmed, he wasn't in immediate danger, all those to me just all come together to make me be like, doesn't sound like Clyde. The Barrow family obviously hated that Clyde was being blamed for pretty much almost every crime in the area. Bonnie and Clyde, at this time, they start collecting newspaper articles about themselves. So how do we know this? They were actually found in abandoned vehicles from the couple. I kind of like that idea, like the police come across this abandoned vehicle has all this.
It has all this press.
Right.
Well, we know that Bonnie wanted to be famous,
right.
So I could imagine that this is as close as she's gotten.
Right. This validates the belief that they're important. They're in the newspapers. They're making it. At this point, though, Clyde realizes that he needs somebody more than just himself. Again, Bonnie didn't really count to him because she still kept away from the main action. She didn't really like guns. She wasn't shooting the guns at this point. And plus, he liked the idea of giving it kind of more fame to him, like Jesse James and the James Gang. Like all the big criminals had gangs that they led. He thought about that. So this is really funny. He first recruits Frank Hardy and Hollis Hale, so the Barrow Gang, and he decides he's going to initiate them. Okay. They're going to rob a bank.
Okay.
So they go into the first bank and they go into it and they actually were informed that the bank had just failed, which sounds kind of crazy, but this is during the Great Depression. So for those who for those who don't know, like banks are failing. There's like one guy in there and being like, yeah, the bank's not open anymore.
And we don't have any money.
Right.
Sorry.
Right. Exactly. Which I think that's funny. But the second one, they actually sent Bonnie in first to case the joint, which actually was probably their biggest mistake. Do you want to take any guesses why?
Yeah, because I'm assuming at this point, could a woman even get money without like a husband or something with her, or at least it would look suspicious, I'm going to assume?
Yeah, pretty much exactly.
Oh, okay.
So it was rare for women to be in banks in the first place, and certainly in banks alone without a husband or a male companion. That already put the workers on like high alert. And so when they do the robbery the next day, there's only one customer and the teller already had a gun ready. Again, there was already this idea that something might happen.
So they were ready.
Yeah, there were a few shots fired, but they were able to get away, the new Barrow Gang, with $110. So
I know it's $110 in what, 1932?
Yeah.
We're in 32. But that's still, even in 1932 dollars, that ain't the richest.
No. So this is really funny. This was not at all what Hardy and Hale expected. They were thinking like they were going to get like 6 figures to split among the 3. I mean, 3 being if Bonnie and Clyde together.
Yeah.
So they're like, what the fuck? They thought nowhere near 110. Again, 6 figures is what they're expecting. So they actually, they took their cut. They told Bonnie and Clyde that they needed to go into town for ammunition, and they never came back.
Oh my God. They ghosted them. They ghosted them. Oh no. But fair. If you're only getting that small amount of money, it's not worth it.
Yeah, you're like,
it's not worth it.
I'm not on the police's radar. Why would I waste it for this? So
I'm with them.
Bonnie and Clyde celebrate Christmas with the Barrow family. I like the story that Marie got a bike and she asked Clyde where he stole it, which caused them both to laugh. I don't know.
But where did he steal
it? Now is going to come in another really important character. Probably one of the only other names you have to know besides his brother, who's going to come in later. And this is W.D. Jones. I'll call him WD for most of it. So he's actually a 16-year-old, and he's a friend of Clyde's 19-year-old brother. And WG wants to join the gang.
WD?
Sorry, yeah. WD. Sorry, WD. D as in dog. So this would require another initiation, right? First one went so well. We got to do it again.
Yeah.
Bonnie stays in the car per usual. She's the getaway driver. When WD enters the store, he froze and basically shook his head no. And Clyde called him
oh no, he's a baby.
Clyde called him a coward, and Bonnie's laughing at WD. Obviously, WD isn't exactly happy, but Clyde isn't going to let him go home until he does something. Like, he's got to commit a crime. Like, even if he's not going to stay in the game, you got to do something.
You got to do something. Oh, no.
And so Clyde's going to think about, okay, we're going to steal a car. Now, he's going to ask him to steal a Ford Model A car, which probably means nothing to you because it meant nothing to me. But this was a notoriously hard to steal car. Again, probably to humiliate him, that he wouldn't be able to get it running. So
mean.
So as WD struggled to get this car running, instead of driving away with Bonnie, Clyde gets into the car with WD. Not a good idea. The car actually belonged to a 27-year-old named Doyle Johnson, and his family are witnessing what is happening. Like, their house is right there, and they come out of the house. Yeah. Clyde grabs his pistol, and he warns them to stay back. He got back into the car, and then at this point is when Doyle, the owner, comes out.
Oh, no.
He hadn't seen the pistol. He hadn't heard the warning about staying back. And so he comes out barreling and going straight for his car. Clyde warns him to get back or he will kill him. Bonnie at this point is screaming. She's screaming just to let him go. Just let him go. Let's get out of here, basically. And for the two men to get back in their car. She had already started their car. And what happened next has a few different interpretations. WD shot or Clyde shot. We don't know, again, between two, which one shot. Either way, somebody shot Johnson. Johnson shot and killed. So WD now is a member of the gang, whether he liked it or not, because he couldn't be let go, because now he's part of a murder. Ironically, the police took 7 months to charge somebody for Johnson's death, and it wasn't even WD or Clyde. They weren't. They weren't even looking for them. They find
just some random. They charge some rando.
Well, the local criminals who are well known.
Oh no!
They blame them. So WD really could have gone home and been fine, but instead he's
stuck.
Now you're stuck. Part of the game. So as we judge Bonnie, did she regret Doyle Johnson's death? Well, we have no record of her or Clyde telling their family or anyone else this. That doesn't necessarily mean that she didn't, but it also doesn't mean that she was coming home and crying about it. So we can interpret it in different ways.
Yeah, I can kind of see her thinking it's just par for the course, that it was just something that happened and
right.
And it was maybe unfortunate, but it happened and we're not going to dwell on it.
Right. After that, the three of them drove through Oklahoma, Arkansas, Missouri. They didn't have a real plan. They were just getting money again from these stick-ups at grocery stores, service stations. Nothing at all big in terms of money or even media attention. This time of 3 months was fairly carefree. Clyde drove, Bonnie was handling the maps. WD actually took photos. He's the one who took a lot of the photos that we see of Bonnie and Clyde.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, really? So some of those, yeah. Okay.
Unsurprisingly, Bonnie loved posing for photographs. So one of the most famous ones, and you'll automatically know it, there's this famous photo of her with a gun in one hand and one of WD's cigars in her teeth.
Yep.
And it's hilarious because they were seriously just joking around. They're playing like kids. She's trying to look tough.
She's an actress. So
exactly.
She's acting. She's playing a part in this. From what we know of her, she's leaning into that.
Oh, 100%. And there's a photo of her sticking up Clyde. She has a gun in her hand. We're going to come back to both of those photos later. But there was also something that surprised WD. both Bonnie and Clyde were actually religious. They both prayed frequently, and both of them had religious upbringings, but they maintained it. Actually prayed, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, it's not that they threw that piece out, that they maintained it.
Yeah. And Bonnie, of course, still loved carefully applying her makeup, doing her hair, coloring her hair. She'd color her hair different colors, finding outfits to wear. None of that changed.
Wow. I mean, bravo. When you're on the run and finding that energy,
right.
I mean, I just gotta say, hats off to you, Bonnie.
Exactly. 1933, another potential car theft goes wrong. You might notice that a lot of things go wrong, and these are not professional, slick criminals.
You can definitely tell that this is kind of their first time at doing this stuff.
Right, exactly. And this is in Missouri. They again took a prisoner. This is another lawman, a patrolman, who they eventually let go. So another pattern that we're seeing. Even though they would take hostages, they would let them out later, further in a kind of isolated place. Their plan was to try to visit home in West Dallas once a month. So their family spoke in code over the phone, and now even to Bonnie's mother. So now Bonnie's mom is in the loop with the Barrow family.
So now, she's come into sort of the extended family.
Yep. So her mom, her being Bonnie, Bonnie's mom, Emma, and actually Bonnie's sister, Billie Jean, now would join the reunions, like these family meeting reunions. And Bonnie and Clyde would always give their family money, sometimes up to $100. Family was clearly important to both of them. It wasn't about just keeping the money for themselves. Things are going to get a little more dicey, though, here when family comes into the picture more, when Clyde's older brother, Buck, and his wife, Blanche, are going to join the gang.
I do know Blanche and Buck.
You do? That's exciting.
Well, while they're in the movie, Bonnie and Clyde.
I know. It's been so long, though, since I've watched the whole movie. I did watch clips for this.
I remember sort of the ending part. I don't want to speak ahead, but I remember some of those scenes.
Yeah.
I'm familiar with the names.
Sure. Buck had been in prison previously. A little bit of a family line there. But at this point, he's out of prison, and he actually thought he could convince Clyde to give himself up or leave the country. So Buck's done with crime, which you might be like, but you just said he joined the gang. I will get to that. I will get to that. He was pardoned, and Buck swore to himself that he would never return to crime. He marries Blanche. Buck and Blanche are staying at Blanche's family home when the three being WD, Bonnie, Clyde, show up, having heard of Buck's pardon. They're all drunk. Well, mostly Bonnie. Bonnie's definitely drunk. Blanche is not a fan of them. She's not liking these people. And
they're like, get out, get out. Right. Like, she probably knows what's going to come next.
She's wanting to be protective of Buck, and this is bringing bad news. Bonnie's drunk. The men have guns. Obviously, this is not going to be a good thing. So after staying the night there, Clyde proposed that Buck and Blanche join them for a few weeks in Missouri. So not necessarily joining the gang, but come along with us to Missouri. Clyde still had in mind that thought of raiding the Easton prison. What they thought they'd do is they'd rent an apartment and they'd stay together. Bonnie loved this idea because she'd have another girl to talk to.
She wanted some girl talk.
Yeah. She hadn't gotten at this point that Blanche was like, I'm
not a fan.
And Clyde promised that Buck wouldn't be involved in any of the robberies and Blanche shouldn't have to be around any guns. So Buck agrees. And in a way, he agrees because he's set on convincing Clyde still to get out of crime. He's like, this is going to give me extra time to do that. While living together, Blanche actually has a memoir. She later wrote that Bonnie hated washing dishes. Same girl. Hate washing dishes.
I know.
And she didn't like cooking.
Same. Well, no, actually, I do like cooking.
Bonnie didn't mind if guns were around, but she didn't want to shoot them. Blanche just hated them. So Blanche didn't want to be around them, didn't want to shoot them. They Of course, a group of 4 stuck to themselves, although apparently Bonnie befriended a little girl named Beth in the neighborhood. Because, again,
cute.
you know, Bonnie loves kids. But
yeah,
the neighbors, of course, are going to notice the unusual comings and goings. And they first just go to the police so officers could keep an eye on them. What they thought was that they were selling bootleg liquor. That was what their thinking was. Oh, these 4 people selling bootleg liquor. Okay, we're going to keep an eye on
Which
them.
would be, I mean, isn't too surprising based on the time again.
Right.
Prohibition.
Right.
That is a huge part.
Yep. They have no clue it's Clyde or Bonnie. And obviously Blanche and Buck are not even known at this time.
Mm-hmm.
What ends up happening is the police go to raid the apartment. So Clyde and WD had actually just returned to the apartment.
Uh-oh.
When a car pulls into the driveway behind them, it was the cops. So not that the cops are coming to arrest anybody, but these are the cops coming to check things out. One of the men, a constable named Harriman, who didn't even earn a salary for his job, but he got paid serving warrants, which is what he thought he was going to be able to do. Like he thought, okay, these people are going to be selling liquor. I'm going to be able to give a warrant. I'm going to get money. So he gets out of the car and he goes into the garage. He drew his gun, but it was too late. He was hit by a shotgun, most likely, actually this time by Clyde.
Oh, wow.
How can we place this in Clyde's brain? Well, officer had a gun drawn at Buck, his brother, and WD, so that protective piece comes out when he feels threatened.
Yeah.
So WD is actually struck in the side, and another policeman named McGinnis is shot in the face, left side, and arm. His arm's almost severed. Bonnie and Blanche at this time they're in the apartment. They're completely confused, right? Hearing all this. They have no idea what's going on. And finally, the gang runs into the sedan that they have and they set off, leaving Harriman dead. So he's dead.
Oh, and the other guy's dying.
And another one dying, which McGinnis, he does die. He dies 6 hours later at the hospital.
So our body count is rising.
Yeah. This was not good for the gang for multiple reasons. One, they only had the clothes on their back, a blow to Bonnie, especially.
Yeah.
Because they didn't have time to get any of their stuff.
Where's my costume? My costume changes.
Right. And remember, WD was hit and he's bleeding profusely from his side. They only had a few weapons with them because most were left in the apartment. This was definitely the end of their Missouri vacation. Clyde headed back to Texas, probably because where else would they go now? They didn't have a plan. Blanche, of course, is super upset because Buck is now involved. And in her mind, he's back on the run because even though he was not part of the gang, this all occurred with him being by WD, most likely shooting back. So he returned to crime whether he liked it or not.
Yeah, he might not have intended to do that, but he was in the general area, and now there's no going back once again. I mean, it's kind of like the Clyde thing.
Exactly.
That he's past the Rubicon.
Right.
If you want to say.
Right. It's like, you've been pardoned once, you're not going to get pardoned again. Nope. So in her memoir, Blanche notes that, quote, "We drove so much and so fast, sleeping only a few hours at a time. We traveled through New Mexico, Kansas, Nebraska, Iowa, and Illinois, back through Missouri, Arkansas, Oklahoma, and Louisiana. When the money gave out, something was robbed," end quote. So again, they're robbing to eat because they're starving.
Yeah, just to get by. That's a lot less glamorous than you're expecting. It's not like they're rolling in money.
No.
It's all about survival.
Right. It's like, we run out of money. Well, we need gas. So we got to stick up a little grocery store. The police in Missouri, though, were able to go through their apartment where they had to leave all their stuff. Here's where Bonnie starts getting a reputation. So first they were appalled at Bonnie's poetry, calling one poem, quote, "morbid and gangster," end quote. Most likely, again, because of the themes, prostitution, drug use, being on the run.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I mean, that sounds amazing.
Right. And WD's camera was left behind and the photos were developed. They got candids of the Barrow boys and the stolen cars. And now they could be sure, because they could see the license plates, that they could tie them to those crimes, even though they thought they had done them. They can directly tie them.
Yeah, I didn't think about that.
But the ones that got the most public attention, unsurprisingly, featured the women, mostly Bonnie. So there's the one I already said, her holding Clyde at mock gunpoint. Another one has her 1 foot propped on the fender of the sedan. She's brandishing a gun in most of them. And then, as I said, the most famous one probably with her with the cigar in her mouth.
Yeah, and you can see them. We've included them on our Instagram in terms of like advertising the episodes and such, so you can see them out there, at least some of those.
Which is great to be able to witness these candids. So any ideas why you think these photos drew the most attention?
Well, I think again, we kind of talked about that. Obviously, gangsters and bank robbers are a dime a dozen at this time, but being a woman, I would assume that's novel. So there's a novelty aspect, and then I'm assuming at some point they'll figure out that she's already married, so that she's like sort of this
even more scandalous.
The Scarlet Woman kind of thing. There's a certain amount of glamour to it. She is done up. It is very film star.
Yeah.
You think like that time, like film noir, that kind of thing. So it leans into that. At least that would be my guess.
You're right on track. So as Go Down Together notes, quote, Bonnie Parker, companion of multiple murderer Clyde Barrow, not only dangled a cigar from the corner of her mouth, she was brazen enough to be photographed doing it. End quote. Yes. So people were scandalized that she would be photographed with the cigar in her mouth. Like that was, I just think that's kind of hilarious.
Yeah, that's your problem, guys. Yeah, and the cigar.
It's actually going to become funny later when Bonnie hears all this. But at the time, newspapers are actually suffering from really low sales. And these photographs brought these new to the gangster scene, these new criminal people into kind of the spotlight. And it was all kind of sexy. Clyde and Bonnie were young, good looking, and unmarried.
Yeah. No, I could see why it drew a lot of attention.
Right.
Just even now, like looking at them, it's hard to separate the story from the photographs. That's such a huge part of the Bonnie and Clyde persona and story. So yeah, I can imagine at the time when this was new, I mean, they'd just eat that up.
Right.
I mean, it's social media. I mean, it's social media before social media.
Yeah. This is like what people are talking about.
It's viral.
Right. Yeah, they have gone viral. Bonnie was also seen clearly as this loose woman. Again, she's unmarried, although later, they'll find out that she's legally married, but she's not with her husband, obviously. And basically that question of like, what else was she willing to do? She was willing to do that. Just to tell you a little more about, again, these papers. So from the book, again, Go Down Together, that quote, cheap sensational crime magazines were popular. Even if the facts were usually scant, they were popular. And now Clyde and Bonnie made the pages. Quote, Bonnie Parker had always wanted to be in the movies, and suddenly she was. Bonnie and Clyde were featured in newsreels, short presentations about real individuals and important events played in theaters prior to the movies, end quote. The other members of the gang weren't important. It was always Bonnie and Clyde. And because of the popularity of these newsreels, Bonnie and Clyde were suddenly as famous as pretty much any of the most famous movie stars at that time. They really, hit celebrity status.
People might recognize some of those news stories before that they played before the film. So it's like
linking them.
What I want to say. Yeah, it's linking them. It's like the lines are being bled over. Like the lines are bleeding that between the glamour of the real life and what's on screen.
For sure. And as most celebrities would probably agree, both at that time and probably now, there's trade-offs that come with fame, right? The coverage on Bonnie and Clyde, quote, simultaneously painted them as despicable hoodlums with no respect for human life or property, end quote, and also heroes who may have robbed banks and killed some cops, but so what, right? In 1933, there wasn't a lot of respect for bankers or the police. So for many Americans, Bonnie and Clyde gave them this sense of revenge. Quote, somebody was sticking it to the rich and powerful.
Yeah, it's like you talked about in the first episode, the Robin Hood effect.
Even though we're not able to do that, like they're doing this for us. And to be clear, Bonnie was the real star. If she hadn't been in the picture, Clyde probably most likely would have just been another wannabe gangster. Even made it into the papers.
He's not really the important thing because he, again, a dime a dozen.
100%. But Bonnie, quote, she supplied the sex appeal, the oomph, which is what catapulted them into the newspapers and magazines. Right? They just exuded glamour, even though a lot of their lifestyle wasn't glamorous.
Yeah.
But in these photos and what people imagine of them, it is glamorous. So actually,
just like social media where you're seeing what they want you to see. And you're not seeing the camping and, sleeping in the bush. You're seeing like the sexy photos with the cigar. It's all curated.
Yep, not eating hot dogs for breakfast and things like that. So in the book, actually, former Speaker of the House, U.S. House of Representatives, named Jim Wright, he grew up in Texas and Oklahoma during this time. He was around like 11, I believe. He remembers seeing the coverage of them as a kid. He can capture that idea of what were people thinking. There's a quote from him that said, they always dressed perfectly, wielding guns in a deadly manner, coolly evading capture against all odds. It was a very romantic existence, we felt, that they must enjoy. Even if you didn't approve of them, you still would have to envy them a little to be so good looking and rich and happy, end quote.
I think that sums it up. I'm sure that's what most people thought about when they saw the pictures.
For sure.
In the newspapers and before films.
Yep. 2 weeks after what happened in Joplin, Missouri, so the death of those two police officers, they're in Louisiana. Another car theft turns into a hostage situation. And more importantly, the gang loses. WD somehow gets lost. He's not caught by the cops at this point, but he's like lost in the process.
I thought he's not dead.
No, he's not dead. Lost.
He's just gone.
Gone.
Okay. I was like, oh no.
The hostages this time are a local mortician and this woman named Sophia, who I guess was kind of like a local celebrity. She talked on local radio. Of course, after they were let go, again, another theme that we constantly see, she described both Bonnie, Clyde, WD. She said they all stunk badly, which, to be fair, they were living in a car for 2 weeks at that point.
Yeah. Sophia, you try living in a car for 2 weeks and tell me how good you smell.
And she said they were not dressed in their normal glamorous clothes. Bonnie, I guess, was in a very bad mood, maybe embarrassed by how she looked at the time. We know that was very important to her, especially with this done-up woman. But she still couldn't help being social. When the man, Darby, said he was a mortician, she laughed and, quote, asked him to promise to be the gang's embalmers, end quote.
I do kind of love that, though.
Like earlier hostages, they're later let free. The woman, Sophia, though, of course, wants to exaggerate, make things seem more dangerous than they were. She described to the local press how Bonnie had cursed her and slugged her in the back of the neck with a pistol butt. Lies, Sophia.
Tall tales, Sophia.
The gang heads back to Dallas. This time they're not even doing a secret meeting, so no Coke bottle and blah, blah, blah. But they're basically trying to figure out with WD, what's the whole situation, all of that.
Yeah.
So Clyde's mom tries to convince Buck to stay and just turn himself in. But at this point, he said, because of the deaths that happened in Missouri, he was now part of the Barrow Gang, quote, until the moment came when they finally didn't escape, end quote. Clyde actually even tried to sign a statement saying that Buck and Blanche had just been visiting, which was pretty much true at that point, and that they had just gotten caught in the crosshairs of this, shootout, and that they weren't part of the gang. But Buck didn't listen to this either.
I don't blame him. That's putting a lot of hope into the hands of the law that they would believe that. So
that they believe Clyde, right? They're on the road again, all of them, all four of them. Still no WD. They haven't found him again. This time they head north, back into Minnesota, but they circled through Indiana, Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Louisiana. Blanche, at this time, wrote about how they robbed service stations, grocery stores, and drugstores when they needed money. But they weren't, quote, trying to fund a lavish lifestyle. They were just trying to get away with enough money for gas, food, and clothing, end quote. So not quite what the magazines had plastered all over. And at this time, all of them were so sick of staying in the car, sleeping in the car. And they now really felt like they couldn't stay in motor court cabins because their faces were too popular. And these so-called safe houses for criminals weren't an option because these required way more money than the Barrow Gang had. And it's not like they had the connections. Like, they didn't know Al Capone or John
they're small-time criminals.
Exactly.
They might be publicized, but that doesn't make them, they haven't hit the big time in terms of that.
They did actually, though, still stay at farmhouses. Now, before they were usually seen as anonymous travelers who most likely were on the run. Now, of course, they were criminal celebrities, and people thought it was exciting to host them for a night. It was like, Bonnie and Clyde are staying here. And obviously Blanche and Buck, but they're not as important. But the gang also, of course, knew there was a risk with that, knowing that there were rewards for their capture. They had that policy, as I said before, which Clyde had already been doing, of never staying more than one night. One funny thing about Bonnie and her newfound fame. So about that picture, the one with the cigar, she hated that people thought she smoked cigars. And anyone she stayed with, like, she made it a point to insist that she never, ever smoked cigars. Like, it just was something that bothered her.
You just, like, bring it up out of nowhere. Right. Like, okay, I know you think that I like cigars, but I do not like cigars. I don't like to smoke.
Right.
It was just a picture.
Right. It's like they were goofing around. I don't actually like to smoke cigars. I think she probably didn't see it as, like, feminine. You know what I mean? It's part of that energy. And there was another sore spot for Bonnie, which was, while in the newspapers and magazine, Bonnie's described for her beauty. She's this femme fatale. In real life, at this point, she's seen as cute, but not at all the sexy, dangerous woman described, especially over time, living on the road. Blanche, however, was seen as more beautiful, younger, not something Bonnie liked at all. But Bonnie still tried to steal the show, of course, with her jokes, stories, flirting. Quote, Bonnie knew how to make people believe she thought they were special, end quote. And sometimes it even made people who they stayed with question who was really the leader of the gang. In fact, Clyde's sister Marie, at one point in, like, I think it was her memoir in a paper, had to come out and say, no, Clyde was the leader. Just because she was the one who was talking and all this energy.
Yes. Like, she's sort of the face and the voice of the gang.
The people at the places they were staying are like, oh, she must be the one who's in charge here.
That makes sense.
Keep in mind, still at this time, about 98% or 99% of the robberies that the Barrow Gang are doing are small town stick-ups. They're not these grander bank robberies that I think many of us imagine when we hear of the famous duo. Right? But Clyde did seem to have an understanding of that image that they had. So with Buck and with Bonnie as their getaway driver, they did decide to hold up a larger bank at the First State Bank of Okabena, which is in Minnesota. They ended up with around $1,600. So quite a bit more than they've made before.
Yeah, I'm thinking of the 110. So definitely much, much larger.
Yep. And some city people shot at them as they went away, but no one was harmed in the robbery. And in fact, again, 2 local criminals were blamed and jailed for the crime.
Sorry, guys.
It's actually going to be only later that the Barrow family would admit that the job was done by Clyde and Buck. So they basically got a completely free pass on that one. Another trip back to see family, another Barrow family gathering, although this one is seen as one of these odd ones, one that sticks out. It's described in the book as festive and fretful at the same time. They always took pictures at the gathering, so there are pictures from them, although Bonnie was smart enough to cover the license plates after what happened in Missouri.
Good idea.
Each member of the gang gave money to their respective family members. Bonnie gave her mom and sister $112. Emma, Bonnie's mom, wanted to talk to Bonnie alone. As they walked together, what do you think Emma's going to try to do?
She's probably telling her, there's still time. You can still get out. At this point, we know she's been a getaway driver, but she herself hasn't done the crimes.
Right.
So maybe that's a little bit too much, asking her to throw herself on the mercy of the law.
Right.
But
that's true.
I mean, there's a chance.
Right. Emma again asks her to turn herself in. She's like, the worst you'd get at this point, right, would be a prison sentence. But maybe not even that. We saw with the grand jury before, there wasn't enough evidence. So she might get off, especially as a woman at that time. Already that stigma of, oh, she didn't know, like she might get off with not a prison sentence.
One of the few times it's a benefit to be a woman.
Seriously, that stereotype. But Bonnie replied that, quote, it was inevitable that Clyde would die. And when he did, she wanted to die with him, end quote. Now, after this trip, they heard that an old gang member, Raymond,
our gentleman robber,
he was tried for the murder of, remember the first guy who was shot, that storeman John Boucher? And he was given 99 years at what prison?
I'm going to assume it's the prison. I don't remember the name, but the one that Clyde was at, I'm going to assume, because that's the only prison we've talked about.
Exactly. The Easton Prison Farm. So he's given 99 years there. Clyde, and he's still probably thinking again about a raid on the prison. But since Raymond wasn't actually headed to the electric chair and their current manpower was really small, he's like, okay, that can wait. So he's at this point not trying to get Raymond out. And another blast from the past comes. Clyde wants WD, our good old teen gangster, to rejoin the gang.
He's back.
Yeah, he's back.
Oh, okay, so somehow he had gotten home.
Yep.
I just said he was just off doing his own side quest, and now he's back.
Buck was like, no. He disagreed. Like, this is a kid. I'm getting you 16. But it was Clyde that won out. So they picked up WD. And then after picking up WD, Clyde and Bonnie had some time before they met back up with Buck and Blanche. So just the three of WD, Clyde, Bonnie. Clyde, he was always a reckless driver. To be fair, I mean, a lot of times you're running from the law, but he was reckless even when they weren't being chased. He was driving about 70 miles per hour at night on a pitch black country road.
In those cars, there ain't no safety. Were there even seatbelts?
I mean, I don't know.
Oh my God. I'm already cringing.
I know. So Bonnie's in the front with him and WD's in the back. Clyde completely speeds past a detour sign that basically said that the road had ended, and they crashed through a barricade and the whole car was airborne. It hits rock, it spins across rock, and it ends up on its side. So the doors are jammed, and of course the windows are all broken. There was a nearby farming family named the Pritchards, who obviously heard this. And they come to the scene and they see arms reaching out through the window. It's Clyde. So they're able to pull Clyde out. And next, they got out WD before getting to what they thought was a kid at the bottom. Obviously not a kid, Bonnie.
Well, we know how small she was.
Right. Yeah. And she gets smaller. So Bonnie, she's taken out, but out of all of them, she had gotten by far the worst of it. A common misconception is that the car burst into flames, which caused her injuries, but it actually was battery acid that was leaking that caused horrific scalding injuries on Bonnie's right leg.
Oh my God.
WD later said, quote, the hide on her right leg was gone. From her hip down to her ankle, I could see the bone in places. And
oh my God. Yeah. I know there's going to be some people who are like, well, she's been involved in crime. Do I really want to feel bad for her that, there's a contingent that would say that she deserves this? Let's all recognize the humanity in that. That is horrific.
100%. The family got her back to their house where she's obviously passed out from the pain. The mom, Sally, puts baking soda on her wounds, which is, I guess, a country remedy. And it's actually one that worked, thank God. Like some of those remedies where you're like, no, it's actually doing worse. So what it did was it kept the acid from burning any further.
Oh, good.
But she told Clyde that Bonnie obviously needed a doctor. And Clyde replied that, quote, if she dies, she will just have to die, end quote. Now,
hey,
he said that, however, his actions clearly show he didn't mean it in the next few days.
Okay, Clyde, I won't yell at you then.
Part of the Pritchard family was a son-in-law named Alonzo. Well, of course, there's always one person who becomes suspicious because he sees Clyde and WD gathering up their guns back at the wreckage. So going back, he goes to the sheriff and the town chief of police. So their last names are Hardy and Corey, who had obviously no clue that they were about to face the notorious Barrow Gang. In fact, they thought it was just some kids who had been out drinking. That was their impression. When they entered the house, Clyde emerged from the darkness with a gun and he took them prisoner. Even though Bonnie was pretty much incapacitated, she managed to get in on the action and she grabbed the lawman's guns.
Wow. I can't believe, even with her injuries, that she's able to do that.
Right. And WD told them that they'd be fine. Quote, we want to borrow your car. The three of them take off with the car and the lawman. As we keep hearing, they can't risk having the lawman alert more. Clyde asked them if they had heard of the Barrow brothers. Funnily enough, of course, the lawman had, but they deny it.
Mm-hmm.
So the lawmen are like, no, we've never heard of them. They had.
What's the Mariah Carey?
I don't know her.
Yeah, I don't know her.
And then this is even better. And then they're like, oh, wait, we think we might remember one. Was it maybe Buck?
Oh, God, that must be galling for Clyde.
I love that. When they finally got to the meeting place where they were supposed to meet up with Blanche and Buck in the first place, they have to just decide what to do with the lawmen. Clyde was actually in favor of letting them live, saying, I've been with them so long, I'm beginning to like them. And, that kind of comes across as a snarky response. But in actuality, he most likely was really touched by the lawmen were in the back of the car and Bonnie was laying across them and they were really gentle with her, especially with all the rocky roads that they were going through. Mm-hmm. Most people think that was like Clyde can talk a big talk just like before. Oh, she's going to die. She's going to die. But in reality, he definitely has a soft spot for Bonnie. They still tied up the men but they let them free. When the lawmen went free, of course, bulletins went out about the Barrow Gang and about Bonnie's injuries in particular, because that was going to be a clear giveaway for anyone looking for them. And it obviously sounded like by her injuries, she needs medical help like ASAP. So the gang works their way through Oklahoma and Kansas, but of course at a much slower rate as they had, because they had to care for Bonnie. They couldn't risk stopping, though, at least until the attention had faded. And she was obviously in horrific pain. She couldn't sleep. She really only had salve and bandages for care. So, there's no pain medicine. And plus, money was running out, but Clyde refused to leave Bonnie. So it'd have to be Buck and WD to pull some more small town robberies. By the time they reached Arkansas, they stayed at a nice place with cabins, kind of like one of those motor courts. And Clyde actually takes a big risk. I think this again shows how much he cared for Bonnie. He wouldn't do this otherwise. He told the camp owners and the doctor there that his wife had been burned when a stove exploded. The doctor sees her, and he could only give the recommendation that they need to visit a hospital. So Clyde was a lot of things, but he was a loyal boyfriend throughout this whole part.
We'll give it to him. Roy would never.
So here's another risk he takes. He's off back to West Dallas, despite the risk, because, of course, the lawmen there are going to be on high alert if they're coming home. He meets with Emma Parker and Bonnie's sister, Billie Jean, to let them know what has happened, because, of course, they had read about it, but to give them an update. And he actually has Billie Jean come with, because he's like, she'll offer her some comfort. So not to join the gang, but to offer Bonnie some comfort. The problem is, while he was gone, Bonnie got hooked on Amatil, which I think I'm pronouncing that right. But what you need to know is it's a sedative, and it's essentially like what they give you in anesthesia before you put to sleep. The doctor had prescribed that, and when it wore off, her famous temper returned about wanting more, which also understandable. My temper would,
considering what her leg looks like. I think she's doing pretty damn fine for what injury she's gone through.
100%. By the time Clyde arrived, money was needed again, but Clyde was actually able to get her off the Amatil. Another little good boyfriend move. And he didn't want to leave Bonnie's side still. So the others would have to go and get money. No big banks, no businesses nearby. They didn't want to draw any attention. Buck wanted to steal a large sedan because now there's a lot of people that could fit them all in. Plus, car theft tended to go all right for them some of the time. Anyway, they go about 60 miles away. And again, things don't go as planned. A shootout left a popular watchman dead. Buck had shot him. And to make matters worse, a rape had occurred that night. And it was blamed on WD and Buck. And that went out to the press right away. And it wasn't until later that it was discovered it wasn't them.
We commit murders, but we don't rape women.
Right. Buck and WD somehow make it back partway on foot. And despite trying to find a larger car, it was unsuccessful. So they all cram into this tiny Ford coupe. So just think of like a tiny little, I don't know what it looks like at this time, but a tiny little car.
Yeah, their gang has grown.
Right. So while heading out of Oklahoma, the gang got lucky, though, finally. They got a medical bag that was left by a doctor in his car in the hospital parking lot.
Whoop, drugs.
Not a good move, doctor. It had morphine and sulfates. Bonnie could at least be a little more comfortable. But now they had to get Billie Jean back home, especially after another death attributed to them. So she was sent back on train to Dallas, although before that, her and WD, I guess, had a little small romance.
Oh, kind of cute.
Yep, no need to go into that.
Yep. A little teen romance. Oh.
Right. And as the gang moved through Kansas and Iowa, They sent postcards to their families, updating them on Bonnie. They called her sis in the postcards, that she was getting better, which, yes and no. Her burns were healing for sure, but she was permanently damaged. Billie Jean wrote, quote, "Bonnie never walked any more straight," end quote, which means, in more medical language, essentially the tendons and ligaments had tightened without daily therapy. So without her, stretching out her legs and everything, all of those tendons and ligaments tightened up. And so Bonnie couldn't straighten it for long, her leg. She usually hopped or was carried from here on out, which is,
wow.
Again, not glamorous, and also something you don't think of with Bonnie and Clyde.
Yeah. I know there's people who are going to say that, she brought it on herself, but I'm sure even with morphine and all that, she's still in a lot of pain and not able to move without issue.
Yeah. But as Go Down Together notes, quote, "And yet Bonnie stayed with Clyde. There has never been any suggestion she wanted to leave him," end quote. In fact, if there was a time to leave, now was the time, because she'd get jury sympathy with her injuries.
Yeah. The fact that she's obviously pretty limited in what she can do. And obviously she wants to stay, but that Clyde wants to allow her to stay, even though she's not really providing anything. There's not much she can do.
Yeah.
If she's that debilitated.
She can't drive the runaway car anymore, the getaway car. And if anything, she's a risk because they have to go slower and everything. But the gang continues. They're back in business while in Iowa, which neither of us are a fan of Iowa, so not feeling too sympathetic here, but they robbed 3 service stations. They gained about $125 to $150. And this would be actually one of their last good times. Yes, Bonnie was burned, and Clyde and Buck were wanted for murder. But, quote, "They were also feared and famous," which was something Bonnie always wanted. They were their own bosses. They still must have felt a certain sense of invulnerability. The Barrow Gang always escaped, end quote. But keep in mind, which the book emphasizes, even though they were well known, there hadn't been any organized pursuit of them, just local authorities.
Mm-hmm.
They run them out of town, then that's it. And now lawmen were noticing a pattern to their travel, of how they traveled from the States. And also, they'd always been facing poorly armed cops who weren't used to any of this type of crime in their areas. They hadn't been tested against prepared or well-armed officers yet. I'm going to end there. I know. I'm sorry, everybody. I wanted it to just be a 2-parter, but there's so much information. The next one's going to be pretty short, I think. Maybe. We'll see.
You say that. We'll see.
I know.
I don't mind getting all the details. It's interesting to see what they're actually doing versus in our minds what we think that they were up to.
The biggest dilemma I had as I was trying to condense this episode, because I kept trying to take out some, like, I felt like I could take out any of the murders, because again, that I wanted to show that added to their inability to go home, and obviously it makes them more wanted, more of a threat, right, to the communities. And I also wanted to cover like some of the mundaneness and some of that piece, like you said, that they're robbing local businesses and small service stations. Like, these are not big time criminals, and they make a lot of mistakes, and they bring on people. And so far, it's been okay. WD, he's been hurt, but he's not dead. Same with Bonnie. But their lives have affected a lot of people. Blanche, Buck, who are now part of this crime group. So
and there's still much to come.
Yeah, if you're somebody who thinks it's too much, you can, of course, let us know in the comments or at our email, ambivalent.offenders.podcast@gmail.com. But in my mind, my perspective, I just feel like to get the best picture of Bonnie, you have to know what's going around her, even if she's not in on the action. This is all happening around her in the group. All this stuff is going to impact her. Is she driving? Is she fighting? Does she have a gun? Does she have the gun and shoot somebody and all of that before?
I think it is an integral part. I don't think I could make a proper determination if we skimmed past this.
Yeah. I tried making it just like this, just a bunch of crimes happened and a few people were killed. And I was like, it doesn't capture, I think, both the fallibility and kind of the dumb nature of some of their crimes.
Yeah. And again, it is a contrast with what most people think about what's going on.
Yeah.
If you're thinking of Bonnie and Clyde, you probably have that vision of the movie or, again, bigger crimes, bigger loot.
Yeah.
That kind 100%. Of thing. This really sets the stage for, obviously, their ends, but of us looking at it and saying that they are just small-time criminals. They're not criminal masterminds.
No. And I think I almost wanted to say they're living paycheck to paycheck, but not quite that, but
they're living other people's paycheck to paycheck.
Pretty much, right? Until that money gets low, okay, we got to get money for gas and food and clothes. It's the basics. It's not like they're going out and buying these ridiculous things. Even the fancy cars they're driving, right, are stolen. So,
yeah,
I just want to make a point of that. So we will be back shortly. Hopefully my voice improves. Like I said, this week has been last few weeks have been weird for us, but hopefully we can first finish up Jane's story. I'm hoping, Erin, when are you thinking about that?
Probably soon. I'm pretty close to getting the script done.
Perfect. So hopefully you'll kind of have 2 back-to-back episodes, Bam Bam, Bonnie Part 2, Jane Part 2. And then hopefully by the end of the week, we can finish up Bonnie's story before we then give you another one. So like 4 episodes. So if you're exhausted, just think about us.
So are we.
Yep. And maybe.
And if you're trying to figure out, wonder who they're going to do next. I have a hint out on Instagram if you want to look at Instagram.
For Erin. For me, join Patreon and you can vote between 3 different figures to help me choose by the end of tomorrow, which is Sunday. I'm going to the one with the most votes. So if you want more content, you want a say in the criminals, Patreon is the place to go. Or if you just want to support us, same thing, Patreon or buy us a coffee. We appreciate all of the support, whether it's ratings or reviews and followers. All of it's great.
We love it all.
We love you guys.
We love all of you.
Yes, thanks for following along with us. And we will see you hopefully soon.
Yeah. Bye, guys.